Tales from the Calamity in Louisoix's wake. The ship glided out of the harbour, slowly gathering speed as its sail caught the brisk coastal breeze. Standing atop the quay wall with their father, Alphino and Malisity bore witness to the vessel's departure. Watched as Louisoix Levieur, their beloved grandsire, was carried away across the sea, and then he was gone. Alphino's voice was barely a whisper, his gaze fixed upon the dwindling form of the ship. Malisity glanced at her brother with the red-rimmed eyes, but said nothing. The twins had greeted the news of the grandfather's forthcoming journey very differently. While one accepted his decision with a calm practicality, the other had railed and wept. Still, to see the two of them there upon the quay, their slight arms hugging hefty grimoires, as if their young lives depended on it, one would struggle to tell them apart. They were not so different as they cared to believe. Even had you not gained admission to the studium, and made me exceedingly proud in so doing, these gifts would have been yours regardless. Here, one for each of you. When read together, the two grimoires form a single tome. Provided you support one another's studies, I have no doubt that you will soon come to understand the lesson inscribed therein. The volume Louisoix gave to his grandchildren scant hours before his departure were curious indeed. Crafted such that the content of one would not be deciphered without the other, they hinted at the impish humour which danced behind the oftentimes solemn visage of Charlemagne's premier sage and scholar. Thank you, grandfather. Alphino accepted his grimoire with a practiced grace and dignity. Malisity meanwhile received her gift distractedly and swiftly resumed her attempt to dissuade Louisoix off his course. Must you leave, grandfather? Is there naught I can say to make you stay? Please, dear, we have spoken about this. It had been almost a month since the twins first learned that the Archon Louisoix would be leaving Charlemagne for the shores of Eorzea. His purpose, he had patiently explained, was to aid the distant realm in the forestalling that ruinous arrival of the 7th Umbral Era. Sensing the fixity of his grandsire's resolve, Alphino had chosen to swallow his melancholy and voice no word of complaint. Not so his sister, nor less his father, Fortunato. Malisity protested the journey purely out of her abiding love for Louisoix and the unbearable thought of his absence. Fortunato, strident objection were of more political nature. Louisoix's eldest son was an influential member of the Forum, the body responsible for shaping Charlemagnean policy, and he, like so many of his colleagues, was a staunch opponent of military intervention. It was, he believed, the duty of his countrymen to chronicle world affairs, not to interfere in them. When the steel-clad wolves of the Garlean Empire descended upon Alamigo, it was Fortunato and his fellow who had attempted to parley peace. In the bitter wake of their failed negotiation, however, they saw no recourse but to forsake the colony they had built within the border of the war-threatened realm. Following 5 years of elaborated and painstaking preparation, the plan to evacuate the settlement's entire population to the northern archipelago of their homeland was put into motion. In the year 1562, on the 6th Astral Era, the city of Charlemagne, a renowned centre of learning situated in the Dravanian lowland, became an uninhabited shell in the space of a single night. The twins knew that they themselves had taken part in the exodus, but could claim no recollection of the momentous event, being less than 1 summer old at the time. War is the favoured resort of the uncivilized and ignorant, father, began Fortunato, seeking to launch his own sortie upon the heels of his daughter's plea. The wise abjure it. As Charlemagne, it is our task to observe, to chart the course of history, not to change it. Civilization shall not be advanced through petty conflict, but by the passing of recorded knowledge from generation to generation. My mind will not change, Fortunato, Louisoix responded warily. They had had this conversation almost word for word, perhaps 12 times, in as many days. To ignore the plight of those who might conceivably be saved is not wisdom, it is indolence. And such a passive stance will not take us far upon the path of progress. That you would spare these younglings the horror of war is a decision which I am fully in agreement. Thus do I refrain from exhorting you or any other to return to Eorzea at my side. We must all protect that which we hold most dear in the manner of our own choosing. And so the discussion ended, as it always did, with neither willing to deviate from the script of their oft-rehearsed play. Alphinaud and Malisity, it must be said, were children of exceptional intelligence. So advanced were they in their studies of etheric theory and others as esoteric subjects, that both had gained acceptance to the studium at the tender age of 11. Thus it was the sharp-minded Alphinaud, while able to recognize the logic of his father's argument, could also see that his grandfather's cause was just. That the boy remained silent then stemmed not from simple stoicism, but from keen sense of his own inadequacy, a realization that his unpolished skill would yet prove more hindrance than help to Louisoix's endeavour. Though no less bright, Malisity eschewed her brother affected maturity, and gave vent to her discontent, inwardly cursing Alphinaud all the while for his mute acceptance of their grandfather's decision. How can he stand there and say nothing? A small yet conspicuous crack had appeared between the siblings. It was long after Louisoix had taken ship and vanished off the horizon that the fateful day came. Alphinaud and Malisity were crowded in the studium's observatory along with their professor and a throng of fellow students, the assembled sages and would-be scholars huddled around the base of a giant telescope, each taking turn to gaze upon the looming spectacle of the red moon Dalamut. "Dalamut has shattered!" Malisity cried out, pressing her face closer to the telescope's eyepiece so that it dug into her cheek. The view provided by the device, this array of magnifying lenses, was distorted and indistinct, but the fate of the satellites was unmistakable. They could see its crimson-fringed silhouette breaking apart in the skies over Carteneau. "Shattered? What, before it struck the ground? How is that possible?" Excited murmurs and hastily formed theories erupted from teachers and pupils alike. "He's done it! Grandfather has saved Eorzea!" Malisity turned to find her brother's face, her eyes glistening with tears of joy and relief. For some time now, Archon Urianger had been kind enough to relay to them brief report of Louisoix's effort in those chaos-stricken faraway land. It was he who had informed them of the grandfather's presence at the Carteneau Flats, and the battle that still rages like as not beneath that bloody red sky. Shouldering aside his madly grinning sibling, Alphinaud squinted through the ocular lens. Though the air was thick with billowing clouds and smoke and ash, he was forced to agree with Malisy's assessment. Dalamut was no more. But something is awry. Alphinaud continued to scrutinize the distant scene. The red moon's bloody glow had been replaced by an equally unsettling, incandescent rain, as if the heavens themselves were weeping tears of light. Terribly, terribly awry. Dalamut's spectacular demise gave rise to a tidal wave of etheric energy which rendered Linkshell all but useless for a period of many days. During this time, the Levier siblings were left to stew upon the wonder they had viewed from afar. And then after weeks without word, a letter from Urianger arrived. The Archon's elegant script described horrors the twin could scarce bear to picture. From the cracked husk of the red moon had emerged that dragon primal, immense beyond imagining, an incarnation of wrath and raging flame that had laid waste to the land for malms in every direction. Undeterred, Louisoix had persisted with his plan to call forth the power of the 12, and thus, it seemed, was the abomination banished. Eorzea had been saved. When the siblings reached the conclusion of Urianger's staggering account, however, the pale flame of hope which both had been nursing was finally extinguished. On the broken fields of Carteneau did my dearest mentor, thy beloved grandsire, become as light and embark upon his final journey. Alphino's shoulders trembled in quiet sorrow, while Malisity wailed aloud, caring not to hurt her cry. 5 years later, a ship once more glided slowly out of the harbour. Alphino and Malisity stood on the gently rolling deck, watching the gradually shrinking figure of their father alone upon the quay. Recent graduates of the studium, the twins were now 16 summers old enough to be considered of age in Charlene society. And so, although he opposed his children's planned journey, Fortuno had not sought to bar their way. "And now is our turn," murmured Alphino, thinking back to the day of their grandsire's departure. "We follow in grandfather's wake," replied Malisity, her head bowed. Looking over at her, Alphino was struck by how widely their conviction differed. At the crypt rail, however, identical grimoires now hanging from their belts, one could hardly tell them apart. No, they were not so different as they cared to believe.